Welcome everyone to Dropkick DiSKussions presented by Sportskeeda. I'm your host Korey Gunz, along as always with Sportskeeda's wrestling expert Tom Colohue, and this is our Money in the Bank preview show. Money in the Bank will be this Sunday, May 10th on the WWE Network. And Tom, just to start off, I got to tell you, this show is interesting to me because it's really the first show in this, pre-recorded, no fans in attendance, COVID-19 era in which the creative team and the production staff have really been able to lay out and build up the show and the pay-per-view itself. I don't think they were able to do that as much with WrestleMania, considering the circumstances. So what are you expecting from this show as a whole in comparison to WrestleMania, with the time that they've been able to build this show up with, and with the circumstances being a little bit more in front of them as opposed to Mania, where it kind of came out of nowhere and they had to adjust on the fly?
Well, it's definitely going to be very different, and I mean that in a good way. WrestleMania, you're completely right. They built towards something and then had to change what the end result was going to be halfway through the build. So you had a completely separate build halfway through. That happened with the Boneyard. Firefly Funhouse looked like it was already planned before they went to the closed set, as it were. But really, everything was very last minute, including like the SmackDown women's match got barely any time. It's a shame because you look at Ripley versus Charlotte Flair, that would have been a tremendous build. The crowd would have got really behind that one. With Money in the Bank, they've been a lot more patient. They've been able to take much smaller segments, and they've worked with a smaller amount of people. This is something I really wanted to see for WrestleMania. After like Elimination Chamber, anyone who doesn't have a story going into WrestleMania, I wanted to see them sort of put to one side. You can't really build to these big battle royals, and it helped WrestleMania that they stopped building to those. So with Money in the Bank, they've been able to focus a lot more clearly on a small amount of matches, and because they've been building to one match with two winners in the actual Money in the Bank, they've built it around what's going on there. They've been a lot more focused. MVP's doing great work as well. In addition to that, they've been able to use the faction of Andrade, Garza, and Austin Theory, led by Zelina Vega. None of them are booked. So that was a way that they could help put other people over. They've been doing character work for Apollo Crews. He's not going to be there. Buddy Murphy, probably not going to be there. Doesn't have a match lined up. There are a few things at the last minute, though. Like the tag matches, the SmackDown tag match. That's been well built, I think, because it's really got an anyone can beat anyone vibe. But then you look at Street Profits getting beaten by the Viking Raiders. It felt exactly like what happened on SmackDown. So that's the match that's definitely going to be announced soon.
Yeah, I do feel like the show, when you look at the card, kind of to your point about working with a small group of people, it feels kind of like a hodgepodge of things. It feels like there's matches that you could tell from the get-go, from post-WrestleMania on, they've been very focused on, hey, this is the direction we're going, like McIntyre and Rollins, like with Strowman and Bray Wyatt. Those were things that started right after WrestleMania. The show's been very focused on those. And then you look at other matches on the card where you're kind of like, that kind of seems like it came out of nowhere. Again, like I said, when you put the advantage of some forethought into it, it would make you think that the WWE would have had a little bit more of a clearer direction and a better build-up to what they're leading to on Sunday. I think, to your point about, for example, the Zelina Vega faction, they have been a cornerstone of Monday Night Raw, really post-WrestleMania, and none of the three men in that stable are even booked for the show whatsoever.
I think this is a testament to what the creative team can do under pressure and when they're left to get it done. Pretty much since January, they've been booking a completely different plan to everything they were initially planning. WrestleMania was supposed to be planned a year in advance, but then they had a superstar shakeup, they had a draft, they had a wildcard rule, they had the changes to the Royal Rumble and forward in January, they had changes to titles, for example Goldberg in February. Everything changed, and it's been very last minute since. You look at the Money in the Bank card, they probably had these Money in the Bank contestants planned, although they did know Nia Jax would be back. She's been essentially cleared since just after the Rumble, but they didn't want to bring her back. The idea was she was going to win the WrestleMania Women's Battle Royal, have a really big surge, and then come back that way. You can see that in the way she's been presented. So it's one of those where they're really planning it late on, and a lot of it's actually been led by the talent. When you consider that both top champions are essentially picking their contenders at this point. Seth Rollins, yes, maybe not the intended first opponent, but he's one of very few people who are there, who are present, and who want to work with the champion. Seth Rollins really wants to put over Drew McIntyre as an example.
We've talked a little bit on the show before about, back in the golden age, of wrestling, back in the 80s and early 90s, that, for example, with WrestleMania, they would have the main event pretty much planned out a year in advance. And so everything would be booked towards getting to that point at Mania. Not so much now, nowadays, a lot of hot-shotting things, a lot of interchangeable parts. And it's just kind of how the way that the business has become. But with this, kind of COVID-19 era that we've been in, and you've got matches like Money in the Bank, even with matches like the Boneyard match and the Firefly Funhouse match, where things are being pre-recorded in advance. Do you think that it's actually been a blessing in disguise? Because when they record those main event matches beforehand, they've already got them in the can. That's where we're going. So for better or worse, we've got X amount of weeks to build these guys and gals up, build these participants up, and get them over for better or worse because, hey, we've already got the match on film. That's what we're going with. So now it's our job in the interim to get these guys over and get them to a spot where fans are going to be interested in watching, what we have for them on May 10th.
There are definitely some benefits to it. It means that certain people who have history of changing things last minute are not able to do that. That said, when it comes to WrestleMania, this is one of very few years where the entire card has not been planned a year in advance.
Before we get into the card for Money in the Bank and we start giving some of our predictions and picks, let's first touch on some news and notes from the last week, starting with a guy we talked about last week on the show in Jinder Mahal. On last week's show, we discussed his in-ring return on Raw and that he could possibly be the next in line to challenge Drew McIntyre for the WWE Championship. Tom, tell us why this seems to be even more likely now than we thought even last week.
Well, I know we're not talking predictions yet. This might give away my one a little bit. But Drew McIntyre certainly wants to work with Jinder Mahal. I mentioned previously that champions have always been able to have at least some say in their challenges. They can't usually say, I want to lose the title to this person, because there is a greater plan in place. But champions can really put people over in a way that even the booking team sometimes can't, because they have that leeway to choose who they want to work with. This goes back a long way. Shawn Michaels working with Diesel and so on and so forth. Steve Austin working with Mick Foley instead of Steve Williams leading into the Brawl for All. And the Big Show credits Brock Lesnar with restarting his career. It won't be easy for Jinder Mahal to get back to the level he was previous, and really there are ways to do it. He gets such tremendous heat just by being pushed that all they really have to do is push him, and people will push him as a heel anyway. But without a crowd booing him, it might be quite difficult because people might look at him slightly differently. That said, there is a huge new TV deal that the WWE have going on in India, and they want to push someone who appeals to that market. So Jinder Mahal, whether he's getting championship opportunities or not, he's definitely going to get pushed hard.
Is Drew kind of, putting his neck on the line and really in essence maybe the way that his title run is looked at as far as it being a success on the line and going to bat for Mahal and saying, hey, even though this guy has, been on the shelf for a little bit, he hasn't really been pushed the way he was when he had his championship run on SmackDown. This is a guy that I think I can, make money with. This is a guy that I'm friends with. This is a guy I want to feud with. If this goes poorly, could Drew kind of been cutting his own legs out from under himself?
There is a risk of that, because you still have to prove that you are a draw as a champion, and having a good opponent is one of the key ways in doing that. Clearly, Drew believes this is a good opponent, but ultimately so did the WWE. It's quite possible they were going to go in this direction anyway, because they do want to boost their ratings in India. And really, this is one of the reasons that we've been talking about the ratings being overblown and maybe misconstrued because of the record lows. they're not measured globally when you get ratings reports, and global viewership's up every year. Stuff like this, pushing Mahal and getting an Indian audience because of it, that's one of the reasons they do this.
Yeah, and Drew's a guy that, I think a lot of fans were glad to finally get the title and kind of get this run, so I know we're all hoping for the best. So, and again, I said on last week's show, I was a fan of Jinder Mahal. I thought he made for a really good WWE champion. I don't get a lot of the hate that he gets online and on social media. So I think, and especially with the 3MB history you could play off of, I think it'll be a perfectly fine feud for him, and I don't think it's going to impact him in a negative way, but I think most people are hoping that, a lot of people are looking at it like, I just hope Jinder Mahal doesn't screw up, Drew McIntyre's title reign. I don't personally look at it that way, but I know a lot of people kind of have that sense that maybe this isn't the best guy to throw it, because, again, like you said, a champion's opponents are really the ones that make the money and make the feud.
Well, that's true. There are a number of opponents not available right now. We've got a few people who weren't around. AJ Styles could have been an opponent lined up next, but he's only just come back. Randy Orton would have been a perfect opponent for Drew McIntyre at this point, but he has taken time off. So we really need to see a bit more time spent bringing people back. We need to be patient, because of a little patience, we can get a full Andrade McIntyre feud. Andrade just needs a little bit of leveling up first.
Well, speaking of bringing people back, this past Monday, we also saw another return in the form of AJ Styles, who not only came back to Raw, but also earned his way into the Money in the Bank ladder match itself, which I'm sure we're going to discuss more in a minute. We hadn't seen Styles since he was buried alive by Undertaker at WrestleMania. What's the background for Styles returning here and now, and also seeing himself thrust into the Money in the Bank ladder match?
Well, I've got to say, Styles' reasoning for surviving being buried alive, which was literally just so what, is something I can really get behind, personally. I love it. I absolutely love it. His time off was planned well in advance. He knew this was coming. Everyone knew this was coming. He had, unfortunately, an injury in January. He needed a bit of time off to deal with a few more injuries as well. And while he's been away, a lot's changed. Gallows and Anderson are now gone. You've got a new champion, and there's no Undertaker to be seen. So he's taking his time off. Things have changed a little bit, but he's just one of many people who's due back soon. He was in the match when it was recorded almost a month ago, and it was filmed in a way that people would be protected, not take too many bumps at once. Apart from apparently Vince McMahon taking bumps, but I'll believe that when I see it.
Yeah, and I want to stress something you just said, because I saw people get their tail feathers ruffled on social media a little bit about this. Money in the Bank match was pre-recorded almost a month ago. I hope everybody heard that, which means that AJ Styles was in the match and was filmed a month ago. Because I saw a lot of people on social media saying, they brought AJ Styles back because the ratings are in the tank, and so they needed to bring somebody in right before the pay-per-view to try to spike ratings and try to, spike people watching on the network. They already knew AJ Styles was coming back because he was already filmed in the Money in the Bank match. I don't understand what some people don't understand about that concept.
This is what we were talking about quite recently, about people taking the ratings far too seriously. People looking at record low ratings and then writing their own narrative. There was a very prominent wrestling journalist who stated that Styles was back to boost a rating, and then a couple of hours later stated that the match had already been pre-recorded. How can both be true? Everyone needs to take a breath and calm down.
Now, something else a lot of people made a big deal about on social media was the fact that when AJ Styles made his return, he was wearing the old OC gear. He had the OC shirt on. Obviously, we know that his stable mates, Anderson and Gallows, are no longer with the company. Are we reading too much into this? Was this somewhat of just kind of a silent shout out to his buddies? Is AJ Styles a little bit disgruntled about the fact that Gallows and Anderson are no longer with the company? Are we making too big a deal out of this than really needs to be?
A bit of both. AJ Styles definitely isn't happy that Gallows and Anderson have gone. However, it's worth asking the question, did Gallows and Anderson want to go? Because to my knowledge, they did want to leave, and that's why they were on the list for releases anyway. Because they'd already vocalized a preference to leave, and given the opportunity, the WWE said, okay, if you guys don't want to be here, let's have a conversation about it. Got paid off in their contracts, that's that. At the same time, if I go onto the WWE shop right now, I can buy an OC hat. I can buy an OC t-shirt. AJ Styles doesn't have that much merch, but he has a lot of club merch. So really, that's the only representation he has for himself, but he still gets to represent his boys. I have to ask the question, though. Whenever those t-shirts are sold, and this may be why he's representing it and hyping it up, do Gallows and Anderson still get paid the merch rights?
Yeah, that'd be an interesting piece of business to know, especially considering, back when the releases first happened, I saw a video of AJ Styles on another interview segment or podcast or something where he basically referred to himself as Gallows and Anderson's big brother, and he felt like he couldn't protect his little brothers. Basically he couldn't stop the fact that they were released, and he felt bad about that. So, he at least made it allusions to that maybe Gallows and Anderson didn't necessarily want to leave, but that, I guess there's no really way to tell if that's actually true or not. But maybe he's just throwing the shirt on to say, hey, maybe Gallows and Anderson do get some merchandise stipend still from the shirt, so he thinks, hey, if I can sell a couple extra t-shirts for him, maybe that's the least I can do.
I would hope so. In the same way, he's essentially keeping them in the public eye, which will be good whenever they get to wherever they're going next. He's not happy that they're no longer there, but that doesn't mean he's unhappy to see them going somewhere they might be happier.
Now, while we're talking about guys that are returning post-WrestleMania, it was also announced that next week on Raw, both Randy Orton and Edge are going to be on the show. We haven't seen either one of them seen or mentioned since their last man standing match at WrestleMania. What's the story there with these two?
Neither of them were supposed to be out for too much longer, but they were both supposed to be out for longer than this. Edge was due back after Money in the Bank to start building towards a Saudi Arabia match, but I'm surprised they're still bringing him back because that pay-per-view is very unlikely to happen right now. Vince McMahon mentioned in the first quarter earnings conference call that they don't expect a Saudi Arabia show to go ahead at this time, which it would have been in June, but they can just tack it onto a different year and have maybe 3 shows next year or something like that. So it's a 10-year deal for a certain amount of shows, 20 shows. They'll make that work. I'm surprised they're bringing him back knowing that pay-per-view is not going to go ahead. Orton was supposed to be out a little bit longer to sell the severity of the loss, and these two men, to my knowledge, were not supposed to be crossing swords, as it were, and engaging with each other when they did come back. But it does open a few options. I don't think we're going to see them wrestle again. It was quite definitive. And really, the storyline was all about a sense of love. It's a twisted love, yes, but it's Randy Orton. That's the only love he knows. So, really, he was trying to be protective of Edge. Well, Edge has proved his point now. So maybe at Extreme Rules, the tag team gets back together. Maybe we get Rated RKO versus Rollins and Murphy. If Stone Cold Steve Austin can forgive Triple H and become a 2-man power trip, surely now we can expect Edge and Orton to be the best of friends.
Yeah, I think a concerto really kind of pales in comparison to being run over by a freaking car.
Exactly, right? Exactly. Look, I can forgive someone running me down. If there's anything wrestling has taught me, it's that if someone shoots me tomorrow, they will win me championship gold the next day.
Now, on that scenario, maybe it's not being run down with a car, but we have talked about that Edge is obviously not on a full-time schedule and will probably just kind of be rolled out during the big-time events, the big pay-per-views. The next one on the horizon is SummerSlam in August. Should we expect something similar where when Edge returns, there's some type of storyline injury or something that happens that maybe we won't see him regularly until the build-up to WrestleMania? Or do you think this is something that Edge is kind of in for the long haul, at least in the summer months, that maybe we could see him at an Extreme Rules pay-per-view or maybe even in a Raw main event, before SummerSlam in August?
To my knowledge, he's only booked for 5 matches, but a number of appearances in the meantime. That said, Ronda Rousey was only originally booked for 7 or 8 matches. and then they added more to her contract. So we'll see in this regard. I think putting him out as an injury, that'd be too reminiscent of what happened with WrestleMania, because he sat out most of the build for that too. And thankfully, Randy Orton did some of the best storytelling of his life. It would be a gimmick to be constantly injured like that, but I couldn't call it a particularly good one, especially when he already has the Ultimate Opportunist gimmick, which I think is a tremendous one. And really, it might be a bit reminiscent of AJ Styles and his "I died, so what" thing, which is that's over with me, but I don't think Edge is going to step on his toes.
This is just a complete sidebar before we move on, but it just came into my head, and I don't even know if you would have this type of information, but you mentioned like Edge being on a 5-match contract. If things get tight and Vince McMahon decides that, hey, Edge, I'd like for you to, have a match on Raw, or hey, I need you at Extreme Rules, next month. Are they paid on just a per match basis? Is it just simply a bonus? Is it a figure that Vince McMahon, writes on a piece of paper and slides across the table and says, hey, I'll give you this much if you do this, one extra match for me? How does that really work as far as contract-wise when you've got a guy that's set for a certain number of dates and then is asked to maybe do a little bit extra, a la Ronda Rousey?
Almost everyone has a different contract, so it's hard to nail it down for certain. But with a lot of the bigger names, they have contracts that give them a certain amount of dates, and that's the guaranteed downside. You'll get paid for those amount of dates no matter what, but you'll get extra paid on extra done. So people who work more matches get paid extra on that guaranteed downside. Obviously, I'm not an expert, so if people do have more information on this, by all means, jump in the comments and let us know. But when it comes to Edge, I'd imagine it's very similar to Ronda Rousey. To my knowledge, it is, whereby there is room for negotiation. The contract would stay the same. However, because of the fact that they're not technically employees, you can sign on to do more work. And yes, Vince McMahon can say, I need you to do this. And then you can say, okay, this is my price. Which is, of course, what happened back in the day of Ultimate Warrior with Jeff Jarrett. There is lots of precedent for this.
Last thing we'll talk about before we actually get into the Money in the Bank card itself. A lot was made this past week when there was video footage of past WrestleManias. In particular, it was during the Seth Rollins promo where he was talking about how he, quote-unquote, beat Brock Lesnar in the main event of WrestleMania. And the footage that they showed was actually from WrestleMania 31, where he cashed in his Money in the Bank briefcase during the Brock Lesnar Roman Reigns match. And if you remember, in that match, he actually pinned Roman Reigns, not Brock Lesnar. But the footage that they aired conveniently edited Roman out of the match and kind of made it appear like Rollins beat Lesnar, or just kind of bypassed the pinfall and then just showed Rollins with the title, etc., etc. A lot of people seem to take this as meaning that Roman has some type of heat with the WWE for the fact that he's essentially opted out of the company until this pandemic is completely over, and considering his health situation, obviously taking himself out of WrestleMania and not being available really for the foreseeable future. Again, are we reading too much into this? Is this something where Roman has a little bit of heat with the company, and so they're going to say, hey, we're just going to delete you out of, our history books for now, kind of out of sight, out of mind? What should we be making of some of this editing that the WWE has been doing lately with Roman Reigns?
Well, none of their editing is accidental. We should be certain on that. They're obviously doing this intentionally and for a reason. I get asked this question a lot, and as such, I ask this question a lot. And I gotta say, people are getting a bit sick of me asking it now because it keeps coming up, but I'm still yet to hear anything about any heat within the company. Sources within WWE have assured me they're just keeping Roman away from prominence because he's not there, and they don't want people asking questions about where he is. I know it sounds strange, but the majority of WWE fans are casual fans. They don't consume the WWE with the intensity that we do. And if you leave Roman off TV for a while, a lot of the casual audience won't even think to wonder where he is, because they might only tune in every 3 weeks, or they'll tune in for a couple of weeks and then stop for a while. So really, this is just establishing a status quo.
So would it be fair to say that he doesn't really have heat per se with the WWE, but at the same time, the WWE probably wouldn't mind if fans kind of forgot about him for a while.
I'd say that's exactly right. A lot of fans and journalists kick up a fuss sometimes when it comes to this, but the casual audience they're doing this for won't see anything from fans on Twitter, won't see anything from wrestling journalists. If you think back to Ronda Rousey's debut, fans and journalists were almost all negative to certain aspects, like Stephanie McMahon putting Ronda through a table and Kurt Angle being involved in some regards. You fast forward to WrestleMania, the crowd don't exactly sound like they care about those opinions, did they?
No, definitely not. Now with this, we've seen these types of editing before. Hulk Hogan, for example, he leaves the country, they edit him out of stuff, he comes back, he's back in, and he's been a guy, he's been in and out so much, they've edited him on and off things over and over. Obviously, so with the Roman Reigns situation, is this going to be something where, when he comes back from his health situation that, hey, all is forgiven and, he'll be placed right back on that pedestal and kind of in that top spot where he was? Or is it going to be something where, hey, we were kind of in a lurch, we understand that you had to leave and that's fine, but when you come back, hey, you may have to kind of work your way up, you may not be in all the opening packages and make all the media appearances for us like maybe you were before.
This has definitely cost him a push, and it definitely cost him the Universal Championship. So while he did what he had to do, and I completely agree with his reasoning, there will be some sort of incidental punishment. It's not an intentional punishment, but if you're not there, you can't be pushed. When it comes to taking him out of the high packages and the opening things to shows, the WWE are out to make money. They are not going to get rid of probably one of their biggest draws, if not their actual biggest draw at this point. There are some people who have been brought in recently who are bigger draws than Roman. Edge coming back is certainly one of them, but he's not full-time. Orton isn't really full-time at this point because of the amount of downtime he has in his contract. Same with Styles. Roman is full-time. They will continue to push him when he does get back. However, it's definitely cost him in the short term.
Well, let's get to the Money in the Bank show itself. We're going to go down the card here with you, and Tom and I will give you our picks, and Tom will give us any information that he has about the matches themselves. Now, we'll tell you that the matches we're going to be discussing is the card as it currently appears on WWE.com. So that may change. Tom mentioned in the opening that, maybe a Viking Raiders Street Profits match, for example, could be added, late into the week. Obviously, we're recording this on Wednesday, so we don't know what SmackDown may bring us on Friday. So we're just going to go down the matches as they were listed on WWE.com as of today. First thing I want to talk about, though, is not a match, but seems to be a building anticipation and a building thought that the hacker that we've seen on SmackDown could be revealed at this show. If you go on social media, on Twitter, there's actually been some hints that have been tweeted out with some codes that you can decipher that end up being the date and time of the show and the location of the Performance Center. So that a lot of people believe that that's leading to the hacker somehow, some way being revealed who that is this Sunday at Money in the Bank. For me, with all the different symbols and the things going on, it seems like Ali would be the obvious choice. So if the hacker is revealed, is it one of those things where it's too obvious to be Ali, so they're going to go in a different direction? Or is it just simply obvious that it is going to be Ali when it's all said and done?
When they first started this storyline, it was such an afterthought, and I mean that creatively. One creative individual came out and said, look, I want to try this, and they said, yeah, sure, whatever. It was listed as something of a Deus Ex Machina. It would come in, it would fix any problem with storylines because things were so crazy, like it did with Mandy and Sonya, just giving them an out and a next step. They weren't even sure when they started the storyline who the hacker was going to be. They really weren't. Ali's the obvious one, but to be fair, he's also the only one who really makes that much sense at the minute because of his background, because of the way he puts his own work together. His self-promos have been so fantastic, and it's really caught the attention. I think at this point, people would be disappointed if it wasn't Ali. disappointed, and to be fair, being obvious and being predictable isn't necessarily a bad thing as long as it's a good story.
If it does turn out to be Ali, do you think that they'll take him in the direction of being a heel? Or do you think that this will be kind of a, truth and righteousness, kind of a, white meat baby face that, which I think would be a little bit of a deviation from the way that the gimmick has been presented. But at the same time, I'm not really sure I can picture Ali being a heel.
I don't think Ali makes a particularly good heel in my head. I'm sure he'll be able to do it, but I know quite a few people who would not like to see Ali as a heel, particularly as regards his culture and so on. Mm-hmm. There's a bit of stereotyping and typecasting, similar to some other wrestlers who would not like to be stereotyped and typecast in that way. Ali's history is in the police. He does, as an individual, stand for a sense of justice. With this in mind, I think that's the direction they would take the Hacker, if, of course, it ends up being Ali. This, I think, is something they could easily get very wrong.
Yeah, and isn't that always the thing with WWE? It's like sometimes there's things staring you right in the face, and somehow they still seem to screw it up, like having The Fiend lose to Goldberg or whatever the case may be.
To be fair, usually with the WWE, in my experience, they could very easily get it right and then don't.
Right, yeah.
So they've been doing a lot of good stuff recently. They have good storylines and storylines that don't resonate with me particularly well. But there are times when you look at something and just think, all you had to do was this little tiny thing. Yeah. And then it just doesn't happen.
I mean, we've stumped for ourselves many times on the show that we need to be hired to the WWE's creative team, but we haven't gotten that phone call yet. But I'm still waiting, WWE. Like, all it takes is one phone call. Hey, we can fix a lot of things for you.
That's exactly it. I think, if nothing else, what we've been able to prove is that we do know everything and have all the answers.
Right.
So where's our phone call?
I don't understand.
There you go.
Well, let's talk about the card here. The SmackDown Tag Team Championship. It's going to be contested in a fatal four-way match. The SmackDown Tag Team Champions, The New Day, will defend the titles against The Miz and Morrison, the Lucha House Party, and the Forgotten Sons, who just made their debut on, I guess, the main roster, if you still want to call it that, a couple weeks ago. I'm actually going to go here. There's something that kind of, just like we talked about the creative process, there's something that I want to happen or I think would be best to happen, and then there's what I think is going to happen. What I would like to happen is have The Miz and Morrison walk away with the titles here. I like them as heel champions. I think they make a good team. And I think they would allow them to feud with some other face tag teams, like, for example, the Lucha House Party, give them a little bit more of an individual spotlight, and then have the New Day and the Forgotten Sons kind of go off into their feud, because I don't think that feud really needs the titles for that feud to be successful. However, if I had to put money on it, and going by what the WWE's usual MO is, the Forgotten Sons have been getting the big push here. I think the Forgotten Sons win the tag titles. Maybe they don't pin the New Day necessarily to win the titles, but I think this will be a way that the WWE uses to continue that feud. And I think that they hotshot the titles and they put them on the newcomers here. So my pick is the Forgotten Sons in this match. What do you think?
Do you remember when Sanity debuted on SmackDown?
Yeah, that one like 3 minute. Yeah, it was like 3 or 4 minutes long, and then they were all released or sent over to the UK. I think I remember that.
They had a very strong push for a month. They beat the New Day. They lost to the New Day in a tables match on a pay-per-view, and then they beat the New Day again, and then they were forgotten about from there. Sadly, I think that's where we're heading with the Forgotten Sons. There is an idea being put out that the Forgotten Sons were called up as a replacement to the Usos. I've been told that's not accurate, and that the Forgotten Sons were planned to be brought up for several months, kind of to get them out of NXT, where there's really nothing for them, and in addition to sort of replace the Revival, who've now moved on. I think they've done well in preparing this match, in creating a sense that anyone can beat anyone. Lucha House Party beat Miz and Morrison, for example, but I think it's a bit too much of a hot shot, particularly to give the titles to the brand newcomers. I think the New Day will survive this one. I think having just won the titles, they will escape, and then we'll see a bit of a longer feud with the Forgotten Sons. Meanwhile, Miz and Morrison will work with Heavy Machinery, who are the team that I think are likely to be next involved in chasing these titles. So I think we'll see a little while with the New Day holding them, then go to a heel team, possibly, yes, Forgotten Sons, or Miz and Morrison, and then it moves towards Heavy Machinery. For me, it's New Day all the way.
All right, let's stay on the SmackDown side, and we'll talk about the Women's Championship match. The champion Bayley will defend against Tamina. For me, this match, of all the matches on the card, really kind of sticks out like a sore thumb to me for a couple of reasons. One, because there's a SmackDown Women's Championship match, but not a Raw Women's Championship match. And also the participants. Tamina being in here with Bayley. Tamina's never really did a whole lot for me, and she's only been back a short amount of time. I know that some of the other big names on SmackDown, the women, are involved in the women's Money in the Bank ladder match itself, so maybe the pickings were a little slim. But I was just a little bit baffled. Why not have Naomi in this spot or someone else? Just Tamina just kind of doesn't do it for me, and I think it's an odd pairing. I've got Bayley retaining. I think this one's pretty easy to call for all of the reasons that I just mentioned. What about you? Any difference of opinion there?
No, not at all. I'd say this is probably the most easy one to pick. Bayley definitely for me retains. It is a bit strange not seeing a Raw Women's Championship match on the card, but I think we've established that the man has been working overtime for a long time, working with a lot of different people and working almost every show. Happy for her that she gets some time off to do whatever it is she's doing, even if it is in fact just to go to Hollywood. Fair enough. Tamina, I think there aren't many other options. You talk about Naomi. She's already wrestled Naomi Bayley in Saudi Arabia. Carmella would be an option, but that was another feud that happened in February. Lacey Evans, that was a feud that's happened in the past few months. Everyone has already stepped up, and nobody has managed to overthrow Bayley yet. The only person who hasn't stepped up, of course, is Sasha Banks. I think that's all that's left now. They need a new SmackDown Women's Champion. Bayley's done a great job, but she's running out of contenders.
Yeah, I'm really hoping in this match we see some type of further build between Bayley and Sasha. I mean, I got to think that that's really the only reason for this match being on the card, because, again, no disrespect to Tamina, but if she was the best contender you could come up with, to me, why not just leave the match off the card completely? So I got to think that there's going to be something happen between Bayley and Sasha Banks during the course of this match. So really the match itself is not really of much consequence, but it's going to be the storyline build between them two being furthered. At least that's my thought process on things.
I'd say that's very likely. They're giving little subtle hints because they want to make it last. But at the same time, when it comes to Tamina, I know a lot of people aren't the biggest fans, but Sasha Banks is a fan of Tamina. She's worked with her for a while. There's a little bit of mentoring when Sasha first came to the main roster. And Bayley wants to work with everyone. She wants to wrestle everyone she can. Hopefully we're going to see someone like Ember Moon return soon. That could be a good way to get a championship a match there. I think that's something they could revisit, even though Ember Moon did lose clean at last year's SummerSlam. But at the same time, we may be speaking completely differently on the day because Lacey Evans might be holding a briefcase. That would change everything.
Now let's talk about the Universal Championship match. The Universal Champion Braun Strowman will defend against Bray Wyatt. Now I do think it is important to make sure that we point out that he is defending against Bray Wyatt, not The Fiend. And if I'm remembering correctly, I think this will only be the second time that we've actually seen Bray Wyatt wrestle in a match. I know when he was champion, he had a defense against, I believe it was The Miz, where he wrestled as Bray Wyatt. But this is only the second time I think that we'll see him in in-ring competition not being the Fiend character. I'll let you give your thoughts first on this one. Braun Strowman against Bray Wyatt. How do you think this one shakes down?
I would agree that it's very telling that we're seeing Bray Wyatt rather than The Fiend. Because one thing you can say for definite is that The Fiend would defeat Braun Strowman. However, we know their history. Bray Wyatt very much believes in Braun Strowman. I think this might be a match that Bray Wyatt wants to lose. In many ways, not just the actual man himself, who undoubtedly wants to work with Braun and really put him over, as he's always done. He's really worked hard with Braun to do everything he can. And Braun is reaping the rewards of his own hard work as well. But you also have to consider Bray Wyatt changes people. I don't want to see Braun turn straight back heel again. It's getting to Big Show levels flip-flopping. I've spoken on this podcast extensively. If they were going to get out of this match with Braun Strowman retaining, it had to be a storyline reason. The fact that this is Bray Wyatt and not The Fiend, that's a storyline reason. For me, Braun retains.
Yeah, I agree. I think Braun retains. Maybe it's a DQ finish or maybe some type of screwy finish. I'm not sure. He gets just the clean pin on Bray, but I think obviously this is leading up to eventually a showdown with The Fiend. If we take it a step further, just to kind of push it forward a little bit, if we get to the Braun Strowman Fiend match, could Braun Strowman be a guy that we see, put The Fiend down? I'm not counting the Goldberg defeat. I think that was its own special situation. So Braun Strowman, could he be the guy that ultimately, beats The Fiend straight up, beats him clean, and The Fiend is kind of just brought down as more of a just regular character as opposed to this unstoppable monster that he was really built up to be, especially during his initial kind of early debut and early run?
I think that's very possible. I've been a proponent for a while of Braun Strowman being the one who can overthrow The Fiend because I think storytelling-wise, it makes the most sense. Braun knows Bray. Also, in a backstage sense, Bray wants to give that rub to Braun. I've also said for a while I believe The Fiend will be beaten when the mask is taken off. Because that's the Fiend character. It is a self-created concept of Bray Wyatt. It's a protector of him. It's a split personality, as it were. Because now he has no one left to guide him. He has no Sister Abigail. He doesn't have Randy Orton anymore. He doesn't have Matt Hardy. Bray Wyatt is searching desperately for people to follow at this point. And while I don't see him ever following Braun Strowman, it reminds him, being in a match with Braun Strowman, of who he used to be. So I think that could work. But I also think that WWE see money in The Fiend. So we might not see The Fiend lose for a long time. The Fiend has a shelf life. They can go too long. They've got to be more careful.
Let's switch over to the Raw side of things with the WWE Championship match. Drew McIntyre is going to defend his title against Seth Rollins. We alluded to it a little bit earlier on in our news section about where Drew McIntyre may be going from here. So I think we both are probably in agreement that Drew is going to retain in this match. He's my pick here. Who's your pick for this? And assuming that you're going to tell me that Drew McIntyre is going to retain here, what could be in store for the future for Seth Rollins going forward?
Well, my opinion here is that Drew McIntyre is going to batter Seth Rollins. He's going to just destroy him, maul him ever so slightly. I think this is a moment where Seth's going to get beat up pretty bad, and we might see a bit less of him afterwards, just to sell it a little bit. But this is there's a lot of opportunities here for Seth Rollins because he has so much going on storyline-wise. He could still be someone we see working with Edge in future. He still may have unfinished business with Kevin Owens. If Buddy Murphy, who's been heavily involved in this storyline, gets involved and costs Seth the win, there could be a storyline there. He could go back into the tag division, which could be something interesting. We could see Seth and Murphy versus the Street Profits, for example. We could get a long-term feud out of that because the Raw tag team scene is not very strong at the minute. Seth has got a lot of options ahead of him, and they all start with getting kicked in the head by Drew McIntyre repeatedly.
All right, fair enough. I think that's pretty straightforward. So we both got Drew McIntyre winning that match. Let's talk about the Money in the Bank ladder matches themselves. We'll start on the women's side. You've got Shayna Baszler, Nia Jax, Asuka, Dana Brooke, Lacey Evans, and Carmella. I'll start. I'll let you have first pick here. You tell me who's your pick to win the women's Money in the Bank ladder match.
Well, I unfortunately have to say I don't see any of the SmackDown women being in with a chance here. Baszler, Jackson, Asuka are the main event scene for the Raw Women's Championship. They are all going to be chasing Becky, no matter who wins the briefcase at this point. While I think Nia Jax is going to be perfect holding the briefcase and chasing really as that force always over Becky's shoulder, I think she'd be perfect with that. They are continuing the storyline with Shayna Baszler. Shayna still has a lot going on with Becky, so I think logically Shayna Baszler will get the briefcase. She'll be the one asking where the hell is Becky Lynch. Becky will step up to the challenge. I've got Shayna Baszler for this one.
Okay. I'm along the same line of thinking as you, except I'm taking Nia Jax, and really for the same reason that you just explained. You know, she's that big lurking force. She's got the briefcase, so you never know when she's going to strike. You know, she's got that, monster type presence to her, so she could be a threat. She'd be a viable threat that, hey, if she cashes in the Money in the Bank briefcase, suddenly, she could easily take the title. And I think that playing off of her past with Becky Lynch, a little bit of unfinished business there, and if Becky Lynch maybe does take some time off here soon, Nia Jax could get some nuclear heat if she's the one that, maybe at the end, I'm envisioning maybe there's one more Baszler-Lynch match, goes back and forth, it's a great match. Becky ekes out the win once again, she's beaten and battered, and then here comes Nia Jax to cash in her briefcase, takes her out. Maybe they do an injury angle playing off of the fact that maybe Nia Jax is really not the most safest worker in the ring anyway. So they play off of that, and she's the one to take Becky out, end her reign as champion, put her on the shelf for a little while. And then I think you've got a great monster heel for the women's division for the next couple of months whenever it is they decide to do the title switch. So I've got Nia Jax winning this one, and I think she definitely ends up eventually becoming the one to take out Becky Lynch and becomes Raw Women's Champion at some point.
I think Nia Jax is a great shout. She definitely has that championship vibe about her. She's built up strong. What I will say, though, is you say about Becky taking some time off soon. Becky has only been on Raw once in the last 5 episodes of Raw. She's been taking time off for a little while now.
Yeah, good point. True. But so we differ there, and I picked Nia Jax. I believe it was for the Women's Battle Royal at WrestleMania. That's what it was. So I wasn't a good pick there. So I'm going to the well once again. So Nia Jax, if you're listening, and why wouldn't you be? Please don't let me down this time. I'm taking you in the Money in the Bank ladder match. So don't make me for a fool twice. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. So let's not go down that road.
Yeah, it's fair. I mean, she's heard the podcast now. She'll go to Vince. She'll say, look, I need to win this match. It's for Korey. Right. And then obviously he's going to agree. Yeah.
Yep.
Definitely.
Let's go to the men's side of things now. You've got Daniel Bryan, Aleister Black, Rey Mysterio, King Corbin, Otis, and AJ Styles, fresh off of his return from being buried alive. I'll start with this one since I gave you first crack at the women's match. As much as I would love to see Aleister Black win this, because I think that he is a guy that is right on the cusp of being a huge star, and I think it would be awesome to just have him walking around with a black briefcase, just this fighter who you never really know when he may just come around and decide, I'm going to cash this thing in and kick your head off. If I'm a betting man, I'm going with AJ Styles here. He's a proven main eventer. They just brought him back off of WrestleMania. This would be a great way in my opinion, off the Boneyard match. Again, a little bit gimmicky. He got buried alive. Okay. So you kind of get that image out of your head and you give him the Money in the Bank briefcase, and immediately he goes back to being a main event star. And again, I like AJ Styles as a heel, and I think he would do well with the briefcase in this situation. So I'm going with AJ Styles here. Who are you picking on the men's side of the Money in the Bank ladder match?
Firstly, I'd like to say it's very nice to see this particular group of 6, because I think everyone has everything behind them. There is definitely a chance for all of these men to win. They are believable winners. Daniel Bryan is Daniel Bryan. Aleister Black is getting a huge push right now, though I think he would look a bit ridiculous with a briefcase. I also said that about Brock Lesnar, so he made it work with a boombox. Yeah. Rey Mysterio as one last hurrah. I think he'd be perfect for this. I think he could get a great match out of Drew McIntyre as well. Baron Corbin, or the King Corbin as it were, I think he's more than ready to be a champion. I think he's got a lot of history with Braun Strowman. I don't think he's getting Braun Strowman with the end of days, though. Really don't. Otis, I would love to see it. But to be fair, I also thought Rusev was going to win the Royal Rumble. That essentially works along the same lines. WWE are cowards, clearly, but they are not. They are not going to bring AJ Styles back on the go-home show before Money in the Bank, have him win a gauntlet match without having him win that briefcase. He just wouldn't be there. If he wasn't going to win it, they'd let Apollo Crews have his moment. That would be that. They would just do that, and there would be no arguing it. It would be the simplest thing. AJ Styles, for me, must be winning this match, and I can see a hell of a feud between Styles and McIntyre in our future. I am very excited for it.
Should be a great match. I'm really looking forward to it. I agree. All the participants in this, I think, deserve to be there in their own right. I think they'll put on a great show. I do want to ask you about this. The men's and the women's matches are going to be happening at the same time. So we're not getting the typical men's match and then the women's match. Of course, this isn't your typical match anyway because it's going to be at the WWE headquarters and they're going to end up on the roof. And so there's a lot of things that aren't typical about this match. But both the men and women's matches are going to be taking place at the same time. I feel like, I'm hoping not, but I feel like I hope they've taken a lot of time with their editing and the way they're going to present this, because I feel like it could have a high probability of being just a total mess trying to follow what's going on and what's happening unless they've really taken their time to put this thing together and really edit it in a way that it makes sense and that you can follow. Because having essentially 12 wrestlers all brawling inside of WWE headquarters all at once and going after briefcases that are on top of the roof, that just sounds like a tall task to ask any production team. So what are your thoughts on the decision to have both of these matches going on at the same time and having both a men's and women's winner at the end of it?
It's a crazy decision. It is the strangest thing. And I don't necessarily mean that in a bad way, because sometimes you've got to have a little bit of insanity to keep things fresh, It opens a few storyline options. For example, if Otis is at the top of the ladder, is he going to try and grab a different one? If Mandy Rose was in the match, for example, obviously she's not, but that's an example of a storyline option you could get. King Corbin's one of those who could intentionally screw someone else over. And there's just options all over the place for people to crash into each other. Nia Jax has unfinished business with Rey Mysterio from last year's Royal Rumble. Just want to put that in there. Because that could be such a tiny little moment that gets big. Corbin and Lacey Evans were a tag team at Extreme Rules last year. They could end up working together in some capacity, even though Lacey Evans is now more of a face. It adds a lot of options. It makes that insanity exciting. But you're right. If they don't edit this very cleverly, it's going to be a mess. If you spend 15 minutes with the women, you forget there's a men's match going on, and then you cut back and the men have gone up by 4 floors, it's going to be the strangest thing. But I don't necessarily dislike that. They're just going to have to play it very, very carefully. We'll have to wait and see, because it adds excitement. But I also have to ask, when one match finishes, let's say the men go up first and we've both gone AJ Styles. Let's say AJ Styles takes the briefcase and he stands there on top of the ladder celebrating. That's just blocking everybody else from shop because there's a match still going on. So are we watching that celebration, Or are we watching Nia Jax body slamming Asuka on the outside before she tries to get up to a ring? You have to pick your moments very cleverly. It could be that they only filmed, let's say, 10 minutes of content for each match, but they spread it out, they pad it out, they repeat a few things a little bit just to add a bit to it. It's a good way to protect people, but it could end up being absolutely nonsensical. I wish them the best of luck.
Yeah, and what's to keep, for example, a participant in the women's match from going up the ladder and grabbing the men's briefcase? While it's both going on at the same time, I didn't even think about that point, but, the intergender moments and things going on, I mean, I may want to change my pick. I think Nia Jax may go up there and just grab both briefcases, and she may challenge Becky Lynch for the women's title and then cash in on Drew McIntyre at the same night. I mean, what's to prevent that from happening?
That is totally fitting with Nia Jax's character. That is 100% something she would do. I can also see Shayna Baszler, if, let's say, Asuka wins the match, there's only one briefcase left, Shayna Baszler will take on Drew McIntyre. She don't care.
Right.
I can totally see that. How are they going to get out of that one? Oh, so many possibilities. And the annoying thing is, if it's now just a straight, a man climbs, wins the briefcase, a woman climbs, wins the briefcase, I'm going to be disappointed.
I'm telling you, WWE, call us. We have so many ideas. Like that one's for free. We just put that on the podcast. There you go. Like, you can have that one for free. That's just a taste of what we can bring to you, of what we can bring to your product. So, again, you've got our contact information.
Yeah, you definitely give us a call. I obviously won't actually be disappointed. I'm hoping for a great match, and I'm hoping the audience on Twitter and the like enjoy it. I'm hoping everyone enjoys it and they do something unique and clever with it. We'll have to wait and see, though.
Yeah, it should be a good show. I'm glad that we have wrestling to watch. I'm glad that we're going to be getting something this Sunday, and I think the Money in the Bank match, as you said, will be nothing if not unique and something different. So I'm looking forward to watching it. Again, that's this Sunday. And also remember that this Sunday is also Mother's Day, so don't forget your mothers this Sunday. Watch Money in the Bank Sunday night. That's all well and good, but just make sure that you don't forget mom. Send her a call or send her a card. Give her a phone call. Don't forget her on this Mother's Day. I know with everything going on, it's probably going to be maybe a little bit different of a Mother's Day celebration that most people are used to, but I just thought I'd drop that in there, that don't forget that not only is it Money in the Bank this Sunday, but it's also Mom's Day, so don't forget that. Wow,
Korey Gunz, real mother lover.
Absolutely. I will not. I don't take any shame in that. Well, we thank everybody for listening this week. We hope you enjoyed our Money in the Bank preview show. Please make sure that you like or comment on this week's video and subscribe to the Sportskeeda YouTube channel. While you're there, you can also subscribe to Tom's personal YouTube channel as well for even more news and notes. Follow Tom on Twitter at Colohue. I'm at Korey Gunz if you'd like to give me a follow. And check out Sportskeeda.com for the latest wrestling news and articles. We thank you again for joining us, and we will see you next week on Dropkick DiSKussions.